Indonesia, the world's fourth most populous nation. Roughly 2 decades of consecutive GDP growth, 40% of the planet's nickel reserves. A government projection to become a top 5 global economy by 2045. On paper, this is one of the great emerging market success stories of the century. But Indonesia's elite are getting richer at a pace that raises a harder question, one the headline numbers were never designed to answer. 4 people hold more wealth than 100 million Indonesians. That's the headline Oxfam used to describe Indonesia's wealth gap. The country now ranks 6th in the world for wealth inequality, higher than the United States, China, or Russia. In the past 20 years, no Southeast Asian country has seen its gap widen faster. At the top, Prajogo Pangestu stands out. In 2024, his net worth reached $43.4 billion, making him not just Indonesia's richest person, but the wealthiest in all Southeast Asia. That single fortune eclipses the combined assets of tens of millions of his fellow citizens. Oxfam's comparison is blunt. The 4 richest Indonesians control about 30% of the nation's private wealth. The bottom 100 million, nearly a third of the country, share far less. Meanwhile, the median Indonesian worker earns between $250 and $300 a month. That's less than $10 a day, barely enough to cover rent, food, and transport in the cities where jobs are found. The banking system mirrors this imbalance. Deposit records show a tiny fraction of accounts holds the vast majority of Indonesia's financial assets. Most Indonesians have little or no savings at all. These numbers are not abstract. They define who can buy land, invest in new businesses, or weather a crisis, and who cannot. On paper, Indonesia's economy is growing. But the numbers behind the headlines reveal a country where prosperity is measured by how much the FU can accumulate, not by how far opportunity reaches. Indonesia's billionaire class did not appear overnight. The roots of today's wealth concentration stretch back to the New Order era, when President Suharto's government shaped the rules of the game. For more than 3 decades, the state issued select licenses for timber, mining, and plantations, always to a favored circle. These early concessions seeded the fortunes of families who still dominate the country's economy. The Hartono brothers, now known for their control of Bank Central Asia and the Jarum Tobacco Group, began their ascent with state-backed privileges. Their access to banking licenses and capital during the 1970s and the 1980s allowed them to branch out far beyond cigarettes. Lo Tuk Kwang, who would go on to found Bayan Resources, built his empire on coal mining rights granted during the same period. Anthony Salim's Salim Group, once closely tied to the Suharto family, expanded from food manufacturing into banking and infrastructure, leveraging a web of state-issued monopolies and regulatory favors. These were not isolated cases. The New Order's licensing system created a small group of conglomerates with control over key resources. Timber concessions handed out by the Ministry of Forestry, mining permits, and exclusive import rights gave these families a head start. As Indonesia opened up after 1998, these same groups diversified into finance, real estate, and energy, using their existing capital and connections to secure new opportunities. The pattern is clear. The fortunes at the top today are the product of decades of state patronage. The same names, Hartono, Salim, Lo, appear on lists of top shareholders and board members across banking, energy, and industry. The legacy of Suharto's selective licensing endures, shaping who captures the gains from Indonesia's modern growth. Indonesia's growth story is often told through the sharp rise of export earnings and new construction in Jakarta's skyline. But for most people, the system runs on invisible barriers that keep real gains out of reach. The country's commodity economy, centered on coal, palm oil, and copper, funnels profits to a narrow set of conglomerates. Extraction and processing are capital-intensive, dominated by a handful of firms. The result? Owners and top executives receive the lion's share, while millions of workers remain in informal, low-wage jobs. Nearly 60% of Indonesia's workforce operates outside formal contracts, with little job security or legal protection. This keeps wages low and makes upward mobility rare. Java compounds the divide. Java, home to the capital in most industry, attracts the bulk of public investment and infrastructure. Outer islands, rich in resources, see profits flow outward but receive less in return. Local communities often watch as their land is converted, their labor tapped, but their schools and clinics lag behind. Bali offers a stark example. As tourism booms, land prices have soared. Premium plots in Canggu now top $800 per square meter. The surge in short-term rentals and villa construction has pushed housing costs far beyond local incomes. Many Balinese families, once sustained by rice farming, face displacement as fields are sold and rental yields climb. New regulations now criminalize illegal land conversion, but for those already priced out, the rules come too late. The forces that concentrate wealth at the top are not abstract. They shape who can stay, who must leave, and whose future gets written into Indonesia's next chapter. Indonesia sits atop the world's largest nickel reserves, about 40% of the global total. In 2020, the government banned the export of raw nickel ore, ordering that all nickel must be processed domestically. The official rationale was to keep more value inside the country, create jobs, and build a downstream industry for the electric vehicle age. Smelters and refineries began rising across Sulawesi, funded by a wave of foreign investment. The most prominent deals came as joint ventures with Chinese partners, who brought capital and technology in exchange for equity and long-term supply contracts. On paper, the policy worked. Nickel-related exports soared. Indonesia became the world's top supplier of battery-grade nickel, feeding global electric vehicle supply chains and boosting national GDP. But the ownership structure of these new plants tells a different story. Joint venture agreements often leave majority control in the hands of a handful of Indonesian conglomerates, many with direct ties to the country's billionaire class. Foreign partners, typically state-backed Chinese firms, hold large stakes as well. Local governments and communities see only a sliver of the profits, usually through modest royalties or community funds, if they arrive at all. The jobs created are mostly in construction or low-wage processing roles. Meanwhile, the lion's share of profits flows to the project owners and their offshore partners. The export ban, intended to spread wealth, has instead concentrated it further, reinforcing the pattern where headline growth is captured by those already at the top. The nickel boom has lifted Indonesia's economic statistics, but for most citizens, the benefits remain distant, filtered through layers of joint venture contracts and corporate balance sheets. Indonesia's anti-corruption laws require public officials to declare their assets through the LHKPN system. On paper, this registry is meant to shine a light on the wealth of those in power, but the reality is more complicated. Loopholes in beneficial ownership rules allow major assets to be hidden behind layers of corporate structure or family proxies. Some declarations list luxury cars and sprawling land holdings, while others omit offshore accounts or shell companies entirely. The gaps are so obvious that they have become a punchline. In 2023, Bobby Saputra, a satirical TikTok creator, went viral for mocking the absurdly low official wealth reported by some politicians, posing as a minister who owns only a battered scooter and a tiny house. The joke struck a nerve because it reflects a broader truth. Transparency laws exist, but the elite know how to sidestep them. The rules look strict, but enforcement remains weak, and the public is left guessing who really owns what. President Prabowo Subianto swept into office promising to close Indonesia's wealth gap. His campaign speeches leaned heavily on the idea of redistribution, calling for new taxes on the super-rich and stronger public investment. Yet the machinery needed for real change faces deep-rooted obstacles. Indonesia's tax-to-GDP ratio remains among the lowest in the region, hovering below 12%. That limits the government's ability to fund social programs or invest in infrastructure that might benefit the wider population. Parliamentary debates on a wealth tax have surfaced repeatedly since 2015, but no concrete legislation has passed. Business lobbies and conglomerate groups like Kadin quietly shape the conversation behind closed doors, ensuring that any serious challenge to elite wealth faces an uphill battle. The Prabowo administration's flagship proposal, a sovereign wealth fund called Danantara, channels resource profits into public projects, but leaves direct taxation of fortunes untouched. For now, the promises of redistribution echo in a system where fiscal capacity is weak and the levers of power remain tightly held. Whether policy can truly shift the balance or if Indonesia's boom will continue to enrich the few remains an open question. Today, Indonesia's richest 1% hold nearly half the nation's wealth, while median incomes lag behind headline GDP. Political access and resource control remain tightly concentrated. The question isn't whether growth will continue, it's whether it will finally reach the many, not just the few.